Good morning, Night City! Yesterday's body count lottery rounded out to a solid and sturdy 30.
Well, Sonny Jims, it's finally here. The game we've all been waiting for. The game of a generation. Medal of Honor above and beyond. No, I'm just kidding, son. The game is Cyberpunk 2077. Something that started out almost as a bit of a meme, and that's now gone on to become probably one of the most anticipated releases of all time. After years in the making, we can finally sit down and play it, but has it been worth the wait?
Don't like trouble. Don't want none.
Well, it's probably no surprise to anyone at this point, but this thing has had a pretty rocky launch. A lot of early reviews have highlighted just how the game has been plagued by bugs and performance issues, and even now after multiple patches, it's still got its fair share of problems, and is a long way from being breathtaking in its current state.
Staring is rude. You know that, right?
But as a fan of old janky RPGs like Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, and even further back to the games like Deus Ex, this is the kind of thing that should be right up my alley. Look, I'll be honest, I went into this thing with no hype and pretty low expectations. I didn't watch anyone else's videos or reviews, and about the only thing that I've heard is how GameSpot gave it a 7 out of 10 and everyone lost their goddamn minds over it, despite the fact it's got an even lower user score on Metacritic. And I think my biggest takeaway after the 40 or plus so hours I've now spent with this thing is that Cyberpunk is the most schizophrenic game I think I've ever played. I do want to say right off the bat that I think I mostly enjoyed my time with this. In fact, it might even be one of my favourite games of 2020 after Doom Eternal. But it has to be said that I don't think I've ever played something which manages to be so amazing and captivating, whilst at the same time also consistently dropping the ball in other areas.
Shit, son.
The result, I think, coming from a rushed and probably still unfinished development cycle, and it's also just a classic example of the Icarus complex. What you've ultimately got here is a game that's done its best to live up to the unrealistic hype that it set upon itself. When it all clicks though, Cyberpunk 2077 is a damn good game. It's got some really memorable moments throughout its journey that I doubt I'll be forgetting anytime soon. But whether or not it's a game that feels like it's been in development for as long as it has, and if it's been worth that wait, well, that's still undecided.
Shit, son.
In Cyberpunk, you're playing as a character named V, and the first choice you've got to make, outside of whether or not you've got any junk, is who you're gonna be. You choose from one of 3 life paths: Nomad, Street Kid, or Corpo. Having grown up in the rough neighbourhoods of Sydney's southwest, where the median house price is 1.8 million, and everybody eats avocados on toast for breakfast, naturally I picked a Street Kid. As far as I can tell, the main thing this affects though is the prologue, showing how you get established in Night City, and then giving you unique dialogue options for the rest of the game.
Got no ties to Militech. None.
Check out.
Either way though, you'll still get the same scripted sequence of V going loose on the town with your boy Jackie Wells, tearing shit up in a montage that shows off a compilation of really cool looking activities, most of which you never get to partake in at all outside of this brief cinematic. Jackie and V's relationship forms a pretty important focus for the story, especially early on, and I think he's definitely one of the most likeable side characters to come along in video games in a long time.
I mean, maybe it's not as big as that, but...
After that, it takes a little while for things in the story to heat up, more so if you were like me and buggered around with the side missions for a couple of hours.
You have trouble accepting compliments?
But what eventually happens is, through means I won't spoil, you end up with Keanu Reeves' character named Johnny Silverdick hanging out by your side. Silverdick by name, Silverdick by nature. What kind of begins as a bit of a hostile relationship though soon changes to an alliance out of necessity, as you then start to learn the guy's backstory and how the two of you can solve the predicament you find yourself in.
Made it pretty clear since that I changed my mind. Want you to live now.
It's really the driving force behind the entire main story, and there's a definite shift in how the writing feels in that second act. It goes from being kind of fun and carefree to suddenly there being major stakes at play, and V's outlook on the world starts to get all bleak and dreary. You even get some pretty badass flashbacks where you get to play as Johnny, and he's armed with what I could only describe as a hand cannon on steroids. For the ending, all roads end with Johnny and having to decide V's fate. How you get there though is left up to the player. The map is broken up into different districts with different gangs and corporations you'll either be working for or against, and I think by the end of the story you'll have interacted with most of them in some way or another.
Well, alright.
I do think the story in this is one of the game's biggest strengths, and a big part of what makes it so engaging is the writing, but also the way that a lot of these dialogue sequences have been constructed. Compared to a lot of other RPGs where you just kind of walk up to someone and the world around you magically seems to come to a screeching halt, in Cyberpunk, dialogue between characters almost always seems to feel like a real, genuine conversation.
That could have been a damn tough day. But thanks to you, it all went well.
It takes place inside nightclubs, bars, cafes. You can see people walking around in the background. There's cars driving past, there's advertisements playing, and it really just kind of helps to immerse you into the game world. People get up and they move around during their dialogue. They smoke cigarettes or amplify their emotions through body language and facial expressions. I always make references back to Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines when I talk about dialogue in RPG games, and I feel like finally there's a game here that tops that in terms of the voice acting and the facial animations. Not to mention the characters in this are genuinely likable people who you'll often come to care about, or on the flip side, the kind of people you'd gladly shiv with a rusty spoon. As someone who chose to play as a male character, there's also so many good bromances in this thing as well. I think at least half a dozen or so of the guys that you meet in this are just the kind of blokes you'd love to happily chill out with, throwing back a few single malt scotches along with a few nose beers. Without spoiling anything, old mate Goro just might be my favourite. He's a guy that you work pretty closely with throughout the main story, and despite living in the year 2077, he may as well be living in 1977, because his grasp on technology and pop culture is fleeting at best. At one point he accidentally texts you his internet searches, which ends in a funny little exchange between him and V. These are the kind of moments in the writing where Cyberpunk really shines, and it's packed full of these little human touches.
Appreciate the gesture. Truly.
A lot of the side missions are interesting too. You'll track down a serial killer's latest victim by exploring and analysing his memories, investigating the murder of Night City's mayor through to something as stupid as moving a dumpster so a self-aware vending machine can have a better view of the street.
Thank you, V. Boy, are you strong. Here, have a refreshing beverage. On me.
Like any self-respecting RPG, you can choose from different dialogue choices to change how the conversation pans out, but a lot of the time it seems only one or two options are often going to progress it forward.
A big tipper. Generous when I get the answers I'm looking for.
Well look, I think if nothing else, Cyberpunk really does excel in its storytelling and the world building, and that's also one of the few things I liked about The Witcher 3, a game which, outside of its writing, I just found to be mind-numbingly boring to play. This is also a proper R18 game too. I mean, CD Projekt Red really went all out here. It deals with themes of graphic violence, suicide, patricide, corruption, not to mention the whole issue of gender and transhumanism. I mean, look man, this shit gets pretty deep at times, and it's definitely not something that kids should be mucking around with.
Huh, get a load of this one.
On top of that, the language is also pretty colourful. I mean, some of the characters drop the C-bomb like they're living in Western Sydney or something. And aside from that, there's a few sex scenes in the game as well. One even involving full-on female frontal nudity, also known as the best kind of frontal nudity.
Huh, get a load of this one.
Though it is a bit weird though that in a city overflowing with hypersexualized citizens and porno stores on every corner, that there's still only literally 2 prostitutes that you can actually hook up with. I mean, even Bloodlines had a different one in every single section of LA that you went to. And it's a bit of a shame that the romance options are so limited. Not to mention, a lot of these are one-way only. I mean in the sense of it being either a heterosexual or a gay character. So if you're playing as a guy or vice versa playing as a girl, certain characters are going to reject your advances. I know it's a pretty ballsy move for a 2020 game to pull off.
No. You seem to like it.
Now, after a lot of deliberation and going over my footage with a team of experts, I've come to 2 conclusions. First off, I have no idea what the hell this guy is wearing, and secondly, I'm pretty sure that Cyberpunk 2077 is one of the best looking games I've ever played.
Can't stop digging Night City.
The sheer amount of detail in Night City is absolutely staggering at times. There's just so many unique looking buildings, streets, and even NPCs walking around. It's just really impressive. Just seems that any time you can start walking around and then find yourself in some kind of shopping district or a market. There's people walking down the street checking their phones, sitting in a noodle bar or a cafe eating. And there's just this real sense of the rest of the world going about its business that makes it all seem so much more believable. The constant variation with the NPCs and the architecture of the city also prevents things from feeling copy-pasted. And it's also kind of cool the way the appearance of the city so dynamically changes depending on which part of it you're hanging out in. Like this convenience store, for instance, has literally no point outside of aesthetics. And yet they've added in a newspaper and a hot food stand. You've got fridges of canned drinks, magazines, and a vendor behind the counter that's smoking a cigarette. Then head out of the city into the desert and things are dry, barren, empty and lifeless like your mum on a Sunday morning.
Schwacked.
The problem is that it's all just kind of a farce. It's a real smoke and mirrors kind of deal, because once you mess around with the natural order of things, the game world kind of falls apart in front of you. If you actually watch what cars and pedestrians are doing, they're just moving along a very predetermined path, which that's fine. But the moment you make them deviate off that, they don't know how to readjust and fix themselves. This is why you'll frequently see traffic jams or collisions with other vehicles that offer up no solution, or pedestrians that just kind of stand or crouch in one place, unsure of what they're supposed to do next. I mean, they're really just waiting for the player to move far enough away so they can despawn. Those few times I pissed off the cops, most of which were accidental, by the time I'd driven to the end of the block, they'd practically given up chasing me. I don't know, maybe they're just tired. I know I'm tired. I think the visuals could be looked at in terms of a house of cards, right? It looks good from a distance, but pull out one of those cards and it all just comes tumbling down. Still though, I've never taken so many screenshots of a game in my life, not since playing Seed of the Dead. And I think the immersive aspect of the environment really is second to none. It's kind of hard to fault it in that regard. Just don't pull too hard on that curtain or else you're going to rip it right off the wall.
This has a wicked vibe.
Another really big criticism that's been leveled at this thing is the performance. Now luckily, I'm actually one of the few people who didn't have the worst performance with this thing. The fact I've got 32GB of RAM, an i7-10700 and an RTX 2070 might have played a factor in it, but either way, a pretty big issue with the game right now is how it runs for a lot of people. RTX mode I think definitely has the biggest effect on the performance, at least for me anyway. And look, I get the appeal of it and all that, but the subtle changes it makes to how the game looks, in exchange for the toll it takes on how it runs, isn't really worth it in my eyes.
Attention. Any vagrants found in the district will be promptly...
So yeah, I turned RTX off pretty early on and forgot about it pretty quickly after that too. I don't think this was ever going to perform all that well on launch anyway. I mean, not only do you have it launching on the consoles and the PC, but also current gen and the next gen consoles as well. I mean, the amount of work that's had to go into optimizing this thing for all those different platforms would just be insane. So look, if you are one of those poor unfortunate assholes who had to suffer through this at 15 frames per second, well look, my heart really goes out to you, because that shit's rough, man. But all of this I think is going to be improved in time, like Tears in the Rain, and with future patches. And CD Projekt Red, if nothing else, are pretty good at supporting their games well into the future. One thing I don't think they're going to be able to improve over time though is some of the aspects of the gameplay that I kind of took issue with. I mean look, a good story is one thing, but that's only going to carry you so far. I think if I had to sum it up, you've got maybe 50% of the game spent talking to people and learning new information. Then the other 50% would be moving around Night City and engaging in everything else on offer. Cyberware forms the basis for all of your skills and abilities, right? You can upgrade all of these body parts to give you that little edge. Operating systems can augment your vision so you can hack into security cameras, into turrets, or ping the locations of nearby enemies. Or give you a few seconds of slowed down time if you're going for a less subtle approach. Give yourself increased armor, more health points, turn your hands into gorilla arms or mantis claws. Even something as simple as adding a double jump to your legs can have a huge impact on how everything plays. Like any RPG, the more you do something, the better you get at it. So sneak around and knock people out, you'll upgrade your stealth skills. Blast them in the face with a shotgun though, and you'll upgrade your weapon skills. It's pretty simple stuff and easy to get the hang of, and I don't think there's really a right or a wrong way to approach any of this. Though I do think some of the later missions pretty much force you into combat. And I don't think I'd say that the gameplay is bad in Cyberpunk, it's just, it doesn't do anything really all that amazing, or anything that really stands out. Despite the setting and the premise itself, this is really just the same thing we've been seeing in open world games for the last 15 or so years. You've got your main and side missions, there's randomly generated activities where you can wipe out gang members, there's collectibles, item vendors, and fast travel stations. Dismantle weapons for parts or upgrade them, crafting being a particularly useless skill. Then you can equip different kinds of grenades and heal yourself with a stim.
Fuck it all!
Despite the game asking you to make decisions on your starting build during your character creation, you're really not locked into any of these. And even though I'd focus mainly on putting points into shotguns and SMGs, I was still also able to effectively hack my way through a lot of the areas in the game, even right up until the end.
I don't believe he deserves a raise.
It's also kind of lacking a lot of the open world stuff you'd really want to see in a game with such a large scope. If you were like me and hoping to do things like buy a new apartment, go out gambling or to a strip club, improve your standings with different gang factions or any of that kind of stuff, well, then I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news because you won't be doing jack shit.
Come on, gotta lighten up.
In fact, I don't even think you can customize your appearance after that character creation screen. In a world where people have all got robotic arms, legs, eyes, and wangs, I somehow can't manage to get so much as a simple haircut. I don't know, man, it just kind of feels like RPG blue balls.
Go fuck yourself, dickwipe.
Despite there being all these different futuristic cars driving around, the only way to acquire these appears to be through specific missions. You can't just steal one off the street and then park it in a garage or something. And then on top of that, you can't even customize them at all.
Go fuck yourself, dickwipe.
Driving vehicles in this thing also might be some of the worst driving controls I've experienced in recent memory. They somehow managed to create cars in this game that can both over and understeer at the same time. Driving in first person mode is often impossible in some of the vehicles because of the limited field of view. And then driving in third person mode ain't all that great either because of how wonky controlling the camera is. And it really doesn't get any better with the motorbikes either. In fact, I think motorbikes are even worse. I don't even know how to describe what happens in this when you pull up the handbrake on a motorbike. I mean, it just defies the laws of physics. And this is all doubly frustrating because you will need to do a fair bit of driving in this thing. It almost seems like they've tried to compensate for this by putting fast travel points on the corner of every single street. Honestly, I think there's more fast travel points in this game than there are traffic lights. I think that driving is fine when you're just moving in a straight line, but the second you have to make any kind of turn, it just all goes to buggery. Whether or not it was an intentional design choice to make every single vehicle handle like a shopping trolley filled with lead bullion is just beyond me. The only cars I enjoyed driving were the fastest cars in the game, but that's like saying that getting pegged by a supermodel is more fun than getting pegged by a grizzly bear. Actually, you know what? Scrap that. Doesn't make any sense.
Shit, son.
Watching the combat gameplay they showed off before this thing came out, I knew it was going to be a bit janky, and when I finally got into it, well, yeah, my mind wasn't changed.
See you on the other side!
A lot of people kind of defend the combat in games like this because there seems to be some kind of precedence where combat doesn't need to be all that good in an RPG. Now look, this might be an excuse that worked 10 to 15 years ago with games like Fallout New Vegas, Deus Ex, and of course Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. But look, this is a 2020 AAA game, not to mention one that focuses on it a whole lot. So yeah, I don't really think that excuses it. Here's how the gunplay works. You aim your weapon at someone and you shoot them. Headshots do more damage than body shots, and that's about all there is to it. When cover works, you can crouch behind something, and aiming down your sights is going to pop you out of cover to take aim. But this has a bit of a mind of its own, and it works about 50% of the time. You can also use your cyberware to mess around with certain enemies, causing them to go blind or overloading their system with electric shocks or fire damage. And don't even get me started on the combat music too, which kind of sounds like someone trying to tune into a radio station. What's not helping either, I think, is that the difficulty modes in this game are really unbalanced. Normal mode is just laughably easy, there's really no challenge whatsoever. Even a blind monkey could get through the combat without breaking a sweat. But then the hard mode is genuinely hard. It almost feels like you're jumping up 2 difficulty modes as opposed to 1. And suddenly the enemies that weren't all that much of a threat are now able to take you out in literally a couple of hits. Just kind of reminds me of playing Skyrim where the enemies turn into damage sponges and you just go down a lot quicker with nothing to show for it. And it's just a shame that there's no kind of fair, balanced difficulty mode that offers up a genuine challenge. I mean, you're either cruising through the game in power fantasy mode or taking so much damage from enemies that it almost necessitates a stealth approach. Off the back of that, well, what can be said about the stealth in this game? You crouch walk to make less noise and to make detection harder. You stay out of an enemy's line of sight and do your best to sneak past them. And if you're so inclined, you can get around behind them for a takedown and then choose to finish them off lethally or non-lethally. I don't think there's any penalty or benefit to keeping someone alive in this game, outside of some of the missions where it can affect the outcome. But there's certainly no kind of honor system or something like that as far as I can tell. During missions, it almost always seems like an enemy happens to be standing next to a conveniently placed box or something that you can easily stuff them right into for safekeeping. I'm really not kidding, 99% of patrolling enemies in this game almost exclusively do it within the near vicinity of a human-sized box that's practically got their name on it. You can also unlock one of those from above air takedowns, which has one of the shoddiest and sloppiest animations I think I've ever seen in a AAA game. The first time it happened, I thought the animation had actually glitched out, but no, it really is that bad. Honestly, I think Far Cry 3 did it better. In fact, the animations for stealth takedowns in general is just really lackluster, especially that animation of shoving someone inside a box to hide them. Your other option outside of the stealth, which I touched on earlier, is obviously just going in guns blazing and shooting shit up. If I had to sum up the enemy AI in this, I'd describe it as serviceable at the best of times. Enemies like to hide behind cover and throw the odd grenade, and a couple of times I even saw someone try to flank me, but they'll hardly throw something at you that you've never seen before. I don't know, maybe all that cyberware has actually fried out their brains. It's kind of ironic considering all of the tech and the gadgets that enemies in this game have poking out of their bodies that they still can't really manage to gain any kind of edge over V during combat. You could almost also describe this as a bit of a looter shooter too, which kind of ties in with the Borderlands comparisons I've seen a lot of people making, because it seems enemies drop weapons almost every 2 seconds, most of which offer up incremental increases to whatever you've currently got equipped. And yet, for a game that drops so many guns at your feet, there really isn't all that much variety between any of them. A submachine gun you'll find at level 3 is going to look exactly the same as one you'll get at level 20. I don't think there's really a right or wrong weapon type to use either. Despite there being shotguns, rifles, revolvers and pistols, they're all about the same in the terms of how quickly you can take someone down. Personally, I found revolvers to be the most fun simply because a couple of well-placed headshots usually does an enemy in, but it's still about as effective as using a shotgun. Just obviously changes the distance you'll need to be from an enemy to use it. When you get your hands on Johnny's pistol near the end of the game, you become a bit of a wrecking machine, and I wasn't kidding when I said that that thing was a goddamn hand cannon. The noise it makes is so loud that it's almost like you're shooting people into the goddamn shadow realm. Combined with some of the player upgrades like double jumping and faster reload times, eventually the combat can be pretty fun, but it really isn't all that groundbreaking and it takes a fair bit of time to get there. The headline of the day though has to be the smart guns. These are weapons you can eventually start using when you're a higher level, where bullets are going to start automatically homing in on nearby enemies, and firing this thing is satisfying as fuck. There's just something so cool about the way these bullets whiz around corners to hit enemies behind cover. It really leaves a tingly feeling in my penis too. One of the earliest features I think they ever showed off were the Mantis blades in that teaser image that they released what feels like a lifetime ago. This is an upgrade you can unlock after your street cred reaches a certain level, and it was one of the main things I really wanted to get my hands on. But then when you finally get it, you find out it's just so underwhelming and it functions like any other melee weapon, which is poorly.
Go, go, go!
In my experience with it, melee combat in Cyberpunk is laughably bad, and you are so overpowered it's just a bit of a joke. You've got a light and a heavy attack, a block and a parry, and it's so sloppily thrown together that it boggles the mind how they thought they could get away with this in 2020.
We don't play nice with traitors.
The fact that most enemies in combat use ranged weapons also makes it a little bit pointless. You're better off just whipping out that revolver, shooting someone in the head, and calling it a day. But by far the biggest problem Cyberpunk has, though, I think, is the bugs. I was almost going to refer to this thing as Cyberpunk 2076 at one point, but I think that might have been a bit too cruel. Not to mention, it would have opened up a whole can of worms over my old Fallout 76 video. I do think that if this were a game made by any other AAA developer like Electronic Arts or Bethesda, well then it would have been chastised like no other. But for some reason it's like CD Projekt Red's got some kind of hall pass with all of the unpolished and flat out broken stuff in this game. Playing this thing in its current state is like driving a Ferrari that's got a flat tyre and the check engine light blinking. I mean, it's not quite on the same train wreck level of something like Anthem, But still, how some people have given this game perfect scores with these kind of issues, I'll just never understand. This is really the biggest problem with the game at the moment, in my opinion. For a game that transports you half a century into the future, to be constantly brought out of that world due to glitches and bugs is just really disappointing. Luckily, I haven't had anything massively game-breaking. I don't think my game's crashed to desktop once. I've never had missions break or anything like that. More so, it's the constant little visual and technical glitches I seem to experience. I've seen cars floating, I've seen cars stuck in the ground, I've seen physics with a mind of their own.
Welcome, welcome.
I've had item pop-ups that get stuck on the screen forever, forcing me to reload a save file. Sounds are often bugged or completely missing. Things like voices doubling up and causing an echo effect.
Only what I can surmise from what I see on TV.
Or going into a nightclub that's got a DJ and people dancing and there being no music whatsoever. Visual glitches are even more common, like seeing cars appear or vanish off in the distance. You'll see NPCs stuck in walls or props or even T-posing. The best one was where I'd see my character T-posing when I drove a car, but for some reason I wasn't wearing any pants and I didn't have any hair. During combat, enemies will often stop reacting and just stand there doing nothing. I've had another bug where I got stuck in the scanning mode and couldn't leave, forcing me to restart a save file. Literally every single time I did a stealth grab, the textures on the back of the character I grabbed started to glitch out. Deeper than that though, some missions just kind of feel rushed and outright unfinished. Like the absolute bare bones amount of work has gone into them, just to make sure they work from start to finish, but that's about it. It often lacks polish. And this is only the stuff I've come across in my playthrough. It's not even tapping into the vast database of broken shit that other people have seen. These are things that hopefully will be fixed over time, but it is hard to wash that taste out of your mouth. And it does put a bit of a damper on the hype, considering how long a lot of people have been waiting for this.
Shit, son.
I think the ultimate problem this thing had though is that it couldn't possibly have ever lived up to the hype. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that this was the most anticipated video game of all time. In fact, the only other game I can think of that got people so hyped up was Grand Theft Auto 5. And that's a game that Cyberpunk shares a lot of similarities with. No matter what the end product was going to be, to some people it would have never delivered. And that's just the way that gamers are.
One more fucking word.
As I was sitting there trying to think about whether or not I would ultimately recommend this game, I was reminded that they say actions speak louder than words. In this case, as soon as I finished that main storyline with my first character, the first thing I ended up doing was just going right back in and creating another, on a completely different life path to give it another go. I mean, I've played games in the past where the only thing that I've done faster than Alt F4ing out of it was hitting that uninstall button, and that's something I didn't have with this game. Cyberpunk 2077 definitely ain't the most honed and polished experience, and in terms of meeting the hype and exceeding expectations, well, I just don't think it's pulled that one off either. But I do think it's a classic example of the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. I don't think I could really touch on any more stuff in this game, unless I sat here and talked about it for another hour like a total asshole. But either way, this is a game that's definitely dividing people, and no amount of patches or updates or fixes is ever going to change that. Overall though, I don't consider my time in Night City poorly spent. I just wish it came with a lot less speed bumps and a few more bells and whistles.
Shit, son.